From CGTN headquarters in Beijing, this is The Hub with Wang Guan.
Hello and welcome to The Hub. I'm Wang Guan in Beijing. Japan under Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi is crossing China's diplomatic red lines by claiming that a Taiwan contingency is a Japanese contingency. She's signaling potential intervention in China's internal affairs, a violation of the One China principle and the foundation of China-Japan relations. Beijing has responded firmly, while Takaichi remains unwilling to retract her remarks. What is Japan really up to? How badly has it misread China's resolve? And what will happen next? To help unpack all these questions, we're joined by three guests. In Tokyo, Japan, we have Benoit Hardy-Chartrand, adjunct professor of political science and international affairs at Temple University. In Chengdu, China, we have Rong Ying, chair professor at Sichuan University and senior fellow at the China Institute of International Studies. And in Beijing, we have Charles Liu, founder of Hao Capital and founding director of the Center for China and the World at Macau City University. Gentlemen, welcome to this program. Professor Rong, let me turn to you first. Why has China been so angry, so upset about the new Japanese Prime Minister's remarks that says China's reunification with Taiwan would constitute a survival-threatening situation for Japan, implying that Japan may send its so-called self-defense forces to attack China and related parties?
Well, as you rightly said at the opening remarks, that the question of Taiwan touches upon the core of China's core interest. I think this is very much a known fact to Japan and to the international community as a whole. And Takaichi's remarks not only violate, I think, the China's core of the core interest, which is Taiwan, but also, I think, for the first time as a prime minister of Japan, connect, the so-called Taiwan contingency to Japan's contingency, which provide, the so-called existent threatening or survival threatening situation, which I think argues for, because of the interpretation of Japan's constitution, pacifist constitution, for the so-called the exercise the right of self-defense. And as we know, the self-defense, the right to self-defense for Japan has different meanings, or let me put in a simple way, has some restrictions. Because if you look at the UN Charter, that self-defense, the right of self-defense is very much related to the fact that in the wake of the world war against fascism, in order to prevent the revival of fascism, which I think in this case is Japan's militarism, the international community has put some restrictions on that, and because of that, that restriction is very much clearly stated in the Boston Proclamation, and because of that, Japan's pacifist constitution also committed that it would not use force or threat to use force to address or solve its international disputes. And in other words, Japan, as a defeated nation in World War II, its obligations has been codified by law, and any attempts to reinterpret or to find an excuse to exercise the so-called right of self-defense would constitute, I think, not only violation of international law, but as I try to make the point that undermine China's sovereignty and territorial integrity.
I really
which
want
again,
yeah. I really want to ask Charles about this because Charles was born, spent a part of his childhood on the island of Taiwan. So, Charles, let's look at this. I mean, it's not the first time Japan, reinterpreted its own constitution, which says it's not allowed to have air, land, or sea forces, but they did in the 1950s by having this self-defense force. And then Shinzo Abe, the late prime minister, reinterpreted the constitution again, saying that they're entitled to collective self-defense, meaning it can attack other countries should Japan's allies, such as the United States, is threatened, even if Japan can be perfectly safe. And now it's going one step further, saying that it can attack China if China were to reunify with Taiwan. What do you make of all this?
I think there are some conspiracies in play, not only in terms of Japan itself, but also in terms of what they've attempted to do with Taiwan. The U.S. has made it clear that the so-called defense of Taiwan by military means will most likely not happen by the U.S. And Japan, those right-wing militarists are using this as an opportunity over the course of a number of years now to build relations in Taiwan and to make Taiwan, or the people in Taiwan, to be less tied culturally and historically and so on with China. I think the real conspiracy here is that if the U.S. is not going to take a hard and fast position on the issue of Taiwan or the reunification of Taiwan, Japan is happy to play the role of the hardliner in this. And this will move in the direction of what they call the normalization of Japan's position. Instead of being still controlled by the pacifist constitution, they can move to a militarization. They can get back on the global stage in a more aggressive way. I think the real big story behind this is what they will do next, what will happen next, because U.S. has not taken any position on the Japanese Prime Minister's statement or Japanese position on this. And the US is basically happy to let Japan take the lead in challenging China. Now, what that also means is that the Japanese internal forces will move more quickly and more aggressively in challenging China to what they call the normalization of their nationhood, and to change the pacifist constitution and possibly move toward nuclearization in terms of the military. That's a very, very dangerous move. So far, we have not heard anything big out of Moscow, but I'm sure President Putin will also take a very harsh position on this. And even the Japanese have even gone so far as to start talking about territory controlled by the Koreans, which is really something surprising, that they would actually use the circumstances to challenge Korea's ownership of some territories that was allocated to Korea after the Second World War. So all of this shows that the militarist interest in Japan, the forces, are moving aggressively ahead toward militarism again in Japan. And that's really very, very dangerous for all of Asia.
Benoit in Tokyo, Japan, let me turn to you. Thanks so much for sharing, Charles. Now, how is the Japanese government responding to all this? It looks, in all likelihood, that the Takaichi cabinet has no intention to retract her remarks anytime soon.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for having me on the show. Indeed, since this crisis started about 2 weeks ago, November 7th, I think there has been an element of surprise in the Japanese government in terms of the reaction of China. I think what we're seeing right now is a crisis, the likes of which we haven't seen in possibly for 13 years in between the two countries. And even though Prime Minister Takaichi had to expect that her remarks would create a reaction on the Chinese side, I don't think the expectation was that there would be a crisis of the magnitude that we are witnessing at that moment. There have been efforts over the last few days from the Japanese government to calm the situation. They have sent an envoy, Mr. Nakai, to Beijing to speak to his counterpart and see if there's try to smoothen the current situation. This doesn't seem like this was very successful. What we have heard coming out of this meeting so far is that, as you have mentioned, the Japanese Prime Minister is not retracting her statement. So that's where we're at this moment. It's also important to understand the Japanese point of view on this issue, so I'm happy to provide it to everyone.
Yeah, sure. I mean, tell us more about the Japanese point of view. I mean, the right wing versus the left in Japan have been, a long simmering for the past decades. Give us a sense of the rise of the right wing over the decades, slowly but surely, and how they are influencing and impacting, the collective memory, the psyche of the Japanese public. I mean, where is the Japanese public's point of view on all this?
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Well, over the last 10 years, you rightly pointed out there have been certain shifts in Japanese politics. These shifts have been more obvious over the last couple of years. We have seen a rise of right-wing sentiment in Japan. When I say right-wing sentiment, it's not necessarily right-wing in terms of a more militaristic approach, although that's also a part of it. This has been manifested in the last few elections. We have seen some more fringe right-wing parties gaining some seats in the Japanese parliament. However, let's remember that Prime Minister Takaichi, while she is certainly more right-wing and hawkish than her predecessors, she is still part of the same party, the Liberal Democratic Party, that has been in power almost constantly since its foundation in 1955. Now, concerning the Japanese public, which I'm glad you also asked about, what we have witnessed over the last few years, looking at a number of survey, is that indeed Japanese people seem to be a little bit more supportive, a little bit more, I'd say maybe not just a little bit, quite a bit more supportive of Japan playing a greater role in terms of security, defense, foreign policy in the region. I think Japanese people recognize very certainly that the regional situation and the global situation has gotten more complicated.
Professor Rong Ying, tell us about the danger this can potentially lead to. I mean, from self-defense to collective defense, and now, using Taiwan as an excuse.
Yeah, the danger is certainly, I think, huge. First and foremost, I think if you look at the political front, the political trust between China and Japan, and I think with Japan's neighbors in Asia, including Korea and others, are going to be damaged to certain, damage. That is very much, I think, in a way, brings nobody is going to sort of benefit from, as the region as a whole has enjoyed relatively, peace and development. In the meantime, the uncertainties, unpredictabilities, not only in the region, as we have seen that there are territorial disputes, historical issues, and so on, but also I think the spillover effect from the global context. And secondly, of course, because of that, and because of the history of Japan's aggression and its sort of attitude or its mindset related to that history, as we have particularly manifested by the right-wing conservative forces, which is on rising. And they're always concerned and the concern and the worries that a resurgence or revival of Japan's militarism. Right and wrong, this is a real, I think, sentiment, real concerns, because the history, the atrocities of Japan, I mean the wartime atrocities, kept the victims of these neighbors, Asian countries and region and the world at large, arguably, is that the danger is always there. And last but not least, even in the military front, that I think Japan's move, accelerated move along the so-called normalization, in this case is military, and development or growth of development, I mean, capabilities, even offensive capabilities, will definitely stir up, provoke armed races. And that was something I think in the end would very much undermine the region as a whole. And in the end, I think if the Japan's militarism or the right-wing conservative forces, if they are not reigned, I think it would cause more problems at home and also in the region as a whole.